All right. Thanks for being here. Karen DeLoach, artist, author, actor, teacher. There's probably a lot more. How did you how did you find that writing textbooks was different than writing other things?
It reminded me of working on my master's thesis because it's a lot of research and, fortunately, I was doing a textbook for art class, which is my area of expertise, and so I had so much fun selecting art history, uh, artists and images. There's 1,800 images because I knew my students. I knew that they were not going on, most of them, to universities. They were in technical fields, and this was my one chance to inspire them with art and give them lots of things to look at. Even if they didn't read the book, they were at least gonna get a lot of pictures, and I made them do art and select an artist and really create an opinion, an educated opinion. So it was very different than the other books that I've done, which are much more teaching oriented.
When you do your teaching, are you in high school, college, um, some other type of format? Where do you do most of the teaching?
Well, only in the last 10 years was I teaching in college. Until that point, I was a homeschool mom and we homeschool taught all ages. And then the last 3 years since COVID put us all online, I've been working with a lot more adults. When I taught homeschoolers, I didn't make the parents take the classes, but I just encouraged them and drew them into doing art with us and discovered some very talented, mostly moms, to be honest with you. And I realized that, when you're learning an instrument or learning something technical like art that has techniques involved, it doesn't matter what age you are, you're going to be learning the same things. If you're going to learn piano, everybody, whether you're 5, 15, 25, 55, 95, you have to learn which fingers go on which keys and what notes they represent if it's piano, or how to form chords. So the same thing with drawing and painting and the kinds of things that I teach. It doesn't really matter your age. You're all gonna get the same basic things to learn.
When you're a student of art versus a teacher of art, is it a different way you recognize, like, when a student finds something that they're good at or that they're interested in, like a different medium that they're interested in versus when you're teaching? Do you see that? How's that work?
Well, even for myself, I entered college. I could draw. I had good drawing instruction in high school. And I thought, oh, I'll just do painting. And I had no idea, because I'd never had ceramics before, sculpture before, how much I would love that as a medium. And I ended up, because of my professors convincing me that I wasn't a painter and that I couldn't paint, my paintings were expletive deleted, that I was a three-dimensional artist. So I went to graduate school in sculpture and ceramics, which I still love, but there was a place in my heart I really wanted to paint. So it's true that different people have a drawing towards certain media. And that's why it's kind of fun to introduce people to different media so they can, really hone in on things that really it float their boat, make them feel more excited to do. And it's often three-dimensional versus two-dimensional, or paint versus drawing, or soft materials, hard materials. So I think it's all fun. I love it all. I'm really kind of a broad spectrum. And to just put this in perspective, we always consider ourselves students. We're called practicing artists, because we feel like we're always practicing. So I don't feel that far removed from my students.
When you're Have you seen or have you felt yourself a easier transition from one type of art to another, like that sculpture lends itself to something else? Or can
Yeah.
it, I mean, I guess it could be anything, but have you seen like a trend of, if a person likes this, they probably like this also?
Well, that's a good question, and I hadn't really put it together that way, but I know that, uh, you know, I've had students that maybe had ADHD issues that sculpture seemed to be really up their alley. Working with the clay seemed to calm them more. Although I think it's true for all of us, but it seems especially true with students that maybe were struggling either with autism or other issues. And when I started teaching, I didn't have any experience with understanding what was going on in the brain when you do art. And it was only when I started seeing healing happening, uh, understood more about there is some really wonderful wellness connections between doing art, whether it's visual arts or performing arts, musical arts, any kind of arts, just really affects us emotionally, mentally, and physically for the better, whether we're good at it or not. I've learned also working with children versus teenagers versus adults that there are some developmental things that are in place. And even believe it or not, for adults, sometimes it can be more difficult because they've already made some assumptions and come to some conclusions about their abilities that are easily to overcome if they can shut down that left brain critic that's telling you you can't do it. And I think we've all experienced that in some way, shape, or form. What's sad is when I come across very young students who already have that kind of defeatist attitude. And one thing that can cause that is perfectionism, believe it or not. I call it the paralysis of perfectionism because drawing is the basis, and that was one of the ways I was going to answer your question is everybody needs drawing. Well, no matter what form of art or any kind of visual art you're going to do, drawing is foundational. So one of my books is How to Draw, because that is so foundational, and that helps launch people into painting, launches you into sculpture, launches you into other arenas. And rarely do I have young boys who are good at that at first. There's something in the brain that isn't developed yet in little boys. It takes a little longer to develop than it does in girls, generally speaking. But they get it. When they get it, they got it, and it's done. They're gone. They're running with it. And to be honest with you, I don't remember what part of the brain it was that isn't there in 9 and 10 and 11-year-old boys. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But like, for instance, I'd have a class, and these couple of boys that age, they just weren't getting it, to be honest. I'm presenting it to everybody, but they didn't seem upset. They kept doing it. Something happened over the summer. There was this just jump in their cognitive ability. And when they started the class, they were perfect at it. They could do everything. But in their mind, it hadn't changed. Their attitude about it, their drawings wasn't any different than it had been the previous semester. So I knew that it was a perception thing, and as I started studying this more, when a little child is coloring and drawing, and they're creating a triangle for the roof and a square for the body of the house, and this is their house, and this stick figure is mom with the curly hair is mom, this one with the straight hair is dad. To them, it's not symbols. We can look at our children's art or art of children and see it's symbolic, but it's not symbolic. When they do that circle with the sun, or even that half circle in the corner with the rays, that is the sun in their mind. Developmentally, it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with this drawing, this painting. And so when they do develop that part of the brain, if they're still getting very positive instruction on then how to connect with what they can visually perceive now in reality and their skills, then they're going to have that for life. But if, on the other hand, they reach that developmental stage and they get put down or criticized or shot down, or just see the contrast and don't get a positive reinforcement to move forward and to learn more, they can just be convinced for the rest of their life, I can't draw. I can't draw a straight line. I can't draw a stick figure. And, I'm here to say, "Yes, you can if you want to. Yes, you can."
With art, do you find that it's changed the way you visualize it, or just from what you remember from being a kid to now and then teaching it? Do you, if you're working on a project, do you visualize it in your mind? And if it's three-dimensional or if it's on a page, have you put that picture together in your mind and you can see it and then you're just trying to copy it? Or is it when you're learning art, is it more of the first time you see it is when you make it out of something, or you draw it and you're visualizing it then? Like, is it more advanced to see it in your imagination first versus on the paper?
Well, in my imagination, it's perfect, of course. And actually, there is sometimes a pretty big gap between what I see and what I want it to be and what the end result is, and that's where we get these disappointments or sometimes can quit. I actually, because of the criticism of my college professors convincing me that I wasn't a painter, I was not able to finish a painting for over 10 years. I had piles of unfinished paintings because I really wanted to. I love portraiture. I love portraits of people, of landscapes, and I enjoy it so much when it looks like what my imagination says or what I'm seeing in person. And so every time I failed to finish a painting, I felt like I was reinforcing those negative and actually profane words they use to describe my art. You're just proving them right. There, you can't. You're not a painter. But I want to. I was married to having these beautiful baby boys. I wanted to paint them. They were so cute. And it took getting mentored myself, getting somebody who'd been to the Chicago Art Institute, who taught me how to draw, taught me how to paint, helped me develop the skills that I needed to do the type of work that I wanted to do. Now, my husband, when he sees something in his imagination, he has the ability to put it down on paper. Just it goes perfectly, and he's always had that ability. It just is an innate thing, and he's writing and illustrating his own kind of fantasy story, and it's just beautiful, completely different looking art. And that's the real beauty of the arts, is there's room for everybody and everybody's point of view, because you and I could sit to draw or paint the exact same thing and it wouldn't look the same. We're going to bring ourselves to the table. Even when I'm teaching classes, I've got students of all skill levels, but even if they're all about the same level, they're still going to create work that's different. So I love that. We've all got what, 10 different fingerprints that are unique to all 7.5 billion people on the planet, and nobody has the same. I think that's really highly creative, and we have that in us, that made in the creator's image, being creative, half of our brain devoted to creativity. I know I'm not a brain scientist, so I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's still part of our brain. We're all wired to be creative. And when we are in a school system that is primarily emphasizing left brain skills, which are very important, timeliness, memorization, order, logic, um, getting the details right, very gradable skills and educatable and employable skills. But often that those right brain gifts are at least trivialized, if not just downgraded altogether as insignificant or unimportant. Very many of us, they say that 98% of 5 and 6 year olds are creative geniuses, but only 2% of adults. So I'm like, what? What happened in the interim between that brilliance in early childhood and adults that say they can't draw a stick figure or I can't sing a lick? Um,
Yeah, it's the world that stomped out that creativity. Stand in line, go work in this factory, do
that's
this thing,
right. You need to make a
wear
living.
this,
How
don't
you
do
going to
that.
make a living? Well, I mean, I, my graduate degree is in ceramics, for goodness sakes. What was I thinking? What, but
Well,
obviously,
if the world was if everyone was walking around like 2-year-old creative geniuses, we might have a problem too. So probably a mix of both that you need. Interestingly enough, koalas have fingerprints very similar to humans. And when
hmm,
you look at their fingerprint on paper, it's easy to not be able to tell the difference between a koala fingerprint and a human fingerprint. Just a little, a little factoid.
wow.
The with ideas and creativity, how do you let's start with ideas first. Where do you think ideas come from?
Listening to somebody like Albert Einstein, who's considered, one of the foremost creative geniuses of the 20th century. He talked a lot about creativity and the sciences, and he said imagination is the most important part of our intelligence. And he even said that creativity is intelligence having fun, and that if we are truly operating in our full humanity, it will incorporate imagination, which is thinking in pictures, which is very right brain. When you think in words, it's left brain skills. When you think in pictures and whole and see the big picture, it's very right brain. So the goal when you're creating in the art world or in any kind of creative adventure, you're actually creating neural pathways, greater connections between left brain and right brain. So ideas come from deep within our brains and our souls, and they are expressed through our five senses. So what we say, speak, smell, taste, touch, hear. So as we express what ideas we have, we can use them in words, which is very left brain, and then we add pictures, we're adding left brain, right brain, and connecting it into a bigger picture. I know as a child, I loved illustrated books. Even if they just had one illustration, and if that illustration wasn't matching the description in the book, I was highly offended. This character is supposed to be blonde, and you've got a picture of them as a brunette, and it really offended me because in my mind, I'm following the descriptions in the book. I want my illustrations to match. And when they didn't, there was this disconnect that bothered me. And I still I didn't know I was going to be an artist when I was a little kid. I loved theater. I loved drama. I was doing plays in kindergarten. And this jungle gym is a spaceship landed and you're an astronaut, you're fighting off the aliens, this is a long time ago, right? And you're going to be rescued, da 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 da. And I didn't know I was going to end up in film school. That's what I did in my 50s. Oh, like, you
Mm.
know what? I love storytelling. I love the big picture, fun stories. And when I wrote my textbook for my college art students, I told their stories because that's what will help them connect. Not just, Michelangelo did the Sistine Chapel, but how about he spent 4 years on his back on that ceiling, and he was a sculptor, but he felt the divine call to do these beautiful images on top of the ceiling. And he did it for 4 years, mumbling and grumbling, but he felt that call. So as a sculptor, learning to create in 3 dimensions, which is really the most difficult thing to do. Painting is kind of like a step down, easier for him, but he had to do it lying on a scaffolding. So telling those stories really helps connect the images and the artists in the minds of my students. So I love to do that.
Yeah, I often wonder about like how much time he was actually up there. Like it's taken him 4 years, but is he giving him a lot of excuses and like, oh, I'm busy doing this thing, I'm working on this other thing, and I got this other project going on. I'll get there next Thursday. Thursday, I'm going to be on that scaffold again.
I don't know, there's a
Doing a
lot of
base coat.
figures.
Yeah.
There's a lot of figures and panels, I can't imagine. He also did a lot of drawings and prep and sketches for it. It was a bigger accomplishment than I think it started out, which often happens. I don't know, when you write, do you know it's gonna when I started my book, I didn't know it was gonna be a 630-page book. I
Mm.
didn't but, and then now the school just started changing the semesters to 7.5 weeks. And quite frankly, I can't teach my 600-page book in 7 weeks. And not only that, now they're opening it not just to seniors in high school or juniors to high school, even sophomores. Now they're all the way out down to freshmen in high school, and it's just too much for them. Too much
Mm.
material, too much to try to absorb, and they get the same credit for it, but they're not getting the same amount of material. And I'm sad about that.
Well, I imagine you could take an art class, the very same art class when you're 10 years old, 20 years old, 30, 40, 50, 60, and get different things out of it each time. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Or take the same, I took painting in college from 4 different painting professors because I wanted to find somebody who'd like my work, but
Mm.
I wasn't successful at that point of finding somebody who liked what I wanted to do. It's a good point because I know concert pianists that still take piano lessons. And you're thinking, what do they still have to learn? Or opera singers that are taking vocal lessons all the way through their career. It's not something I think we ever feel done. Like, oh, now I've reached the pinnacle. That's the best I can be. We always have that thing inside. My next piece is even going to be bigger. And I still do sculpture, but I also paint, and I love watercolors, and I do drawing, and so and I make movies. I'm also still active in, theater got shut down during COVID. So we kind of moved to the digital filmmaking world with a lot of our Shakespearean plays and things that we've been doing all along. And I have a film school of Ugandan youths that were rescued from the streets, and I met them. They are on a missions trip in 22, and we formed a school. And I do it from here in South Carolina, thanks to the internet when they can get it. They finished shooting this week their third film we've done in 3 years. So I'm really, really excited because these storytelling books, these things, the arts, they're universal and yet so uniquely personal. When I started my classes, I'm thinking these young people are from Uganda, a world I don't know anything about, really. All I can do is teach them what I learned in film school. I took every class in film school because I wanted to learn it all. And I thought, okay, well, I just have to teach it the way that I learned it and the way I've been doing it. And what wasn't, maybe by the second film I realized, no, they're turning it into their own stories. They not only are telling their stories, they're doing it in a way that is very unique to them and their culture, which excites me even more. I wasn't trying to make little clones of Western film. And so that just gives me a lot of joy. They're going to have a premiere next week of this third film. They're going gangbusters. They're doing great.
Wow. How do you tell when you get that initial idea or thought what medium that's going to be expressed in? Like you get this idea standing in the line at the grocery store. Is it going to be a sculpture? Is it going to be a lesson, a teaching lesson? Is it a movie? How do you tell?
That's a really good question because sometimes it's all of the above. It might start out as an idea and it's a drawing, or then I do a watercolor, and maybe then I'm going to do it in oils, and then I get inspired. But sometimes I've gotten directly that this is a sculpture, this is a sculpture piece, and sometimes I draw before I do sculptures too. A series I did, a figurative series, three-dimensional figurative series I did. I did the drawings, very detailed drawings before I did them in clay. Um, but sometimes you just play with the clay and something comes out that you don't, that's
Mm.
uniquely that material. But drawing, like I said, is the foundation. It's the foundation for everything in art. So my sons are musicians. They can all draw and paint, and they're creators, but music is their first love. And they found, you were asking this, can you do one medium to another? They started out as guitar players or piano players. I made them all take piano lessons as much as they would fight me on that when they were young. They love it, and they're keyboardists, they're guitar player. Then one of them went from an acoustic guitar player to an electric guitar player, and another one does the bass, but he also does drums. So they just kind of flow. I think when you have some basics of of a medium, then it can flow pretty easily into others. I know to me, oils and acrylics work pretty much alike, and I can go easily from oils to acrylics. But watercolors is a different technique altogether. With you build your darks to lights with oils and acrylics, you build your lights to darks with watercolor. So that's been kind of fun to do, exploring more with watercolor. It's different way of thinking.
Can you get yourself in the zone of any particular type of art that, like, if you sit down and think, okay, I want to do something like, I want to do a sculpture and this is how I'm going to do it. And then you can start, or is it more of the work talks to you and says, no, this is not a sculpture. This is actually a poem, or, something different.
Yes and no. I usually have something in mind that I'm going to do. I was going to enter an art competition with a cockle oven, which was what I did my master's thesis on, and they are ceramic tile stoves made in Europe. And I had seen them when I lived there and studied them and got material and did research and made one. And then wanted to do another one. They're basically ceramic tiles you put together and put heat inside, and they release heat into the room slowly. So they're really the most efficient room heater situation in the world. Benjamin Franklin discovered them, even though he's famous for his metal stoves. Iron stoves, he said they heat up fast and they lose their heat fast, and you're hot on one side and cold on the other. But with a cockle oven, you're warm all over. And I loved that the cockle ovens I started discovering overseas were changed in style based on the styles of the day. If it was a neoclassical era, they were neoclassical. If it was Gothic, it was Gothic looking. If it, so they changed in looks and styles, and I loved that, and I loved adapting that. And so it took a lot of drawing and designing. And so I did another one a couple of years ago, and I wanted to make it look like my grandmother's chair, her recliner, and it ended up being 48 inches tall. It took 500 hours to create this thing. It was a mammoth piece of sculpture that got into the show, but it didn't survive coming home from the show.
Oh,
Ended up a heap, but I got some pictures of it. And so that really made me want to do it again, but with a little more skill in how to put it together. And at this point, it's not high on my priority list anymore. But so you win some and some you don't win. Some of the films I've done work and some of them don't. It's a lot of working, a lot of moving parts. What I love about filmmaking, and even believe it or not, I was a gymnast in high school and a soccer player in college. I love soccer playing. It's a collaborative art. It's a collaborative sport, right? Gymnastics is you and that device, right? That's it. Even if you're on a team, it's very, very lonely and personal. So I love the collaborative nature of theater and filmmaking. They take the talents of more than just the writer. It takes different kinds of visionaries and skills to put it all together. I mean, when you watch a movie, how long do some of those movies have in their credits at the end? You just think
yeah.
about all the people it took to put that film together. But it started in the mind of one writer. One man or woman was sitting there thinking, this is a great story, and I'm going to turn my book now into a script, or I'm going to do a script about. I see this whole movie, and the writers I know that are good script writers, they do that. They can see the whole movie start to finish. It's there, and yet it takes somebody who can do shot by shot, and see how it's going to be put together, shot by shot by shot, and then it takes somebody who can take those shots and make those shots and take somebody who can edit them together in the end. So many different arenas of creativity required.
Mm. Broke up a little, but I got most of that. So it is the collaborative effort of
Did I come
film
back?
for sure. Yep. Yeah, you're back. So do you do a lot of photography, or are you more filmmaking than photography?
I took photography, and I even helped somebody do wedding photography, videography, more videography. But all my life, my family called me Candid Karen. I always had a camera, and love it. And my joke is, now that we have these little handheld computer phone videography machines in our hands, I'm only sorry for the pictures I don't take. Right. So yeah, I take a lot of pictures, and I've learned how to edit them and how to get the lighting right. And I just think it's fabulous that we all have this opportunity to be photographers and videographers. And now we're all on Zoom, right? So what kind of image are we creating? How do we look on camera? What does the background look like aesthetically? So this is something that I talk to people and other coaches about sometimes, is how do we present ourselves when we have this little world where, you know, I remember meeting a whole bunch of coaches at a conference saying, "Oh, you got legs," because we only
Mm.
see each other right from here to here. So it's amazing how things have changed, and I know personally with AI, I love AI. I don't know if you use Chat GPT or any of those other programs. I find them helpful, and I've not written a book with them or anything, but I know I've gotten titles. They've helped me with titles. They've helped me with all kinds of putting things together, or research materials. And so I say embrace the technologies. When I went to film school in the early 2000s, these are professors that have just been doing film. They've been teaching filmmaking, and now we've got this DSLR digital revolution happening, and you've got young people coming in saying, what about digital? And they were just kind of resisting. And I was watching that happen, and they finally realized that, wow, digital filmmaking is getting to where you can't tell the difference. I don't even remember what digital films looked like 20 years ago based on what they look like now. Now
Yeah.
they're so cinematic, the images they can get, that you can't tell anymore, I don't think. I think you'd have to be a real discerning expert to tell if a movie was shot in film versus, digitally anymore. It's wonderful. I love it.
I see a lot of the special effects when you see something blow up or catch on fire that has the digital version of that. And you go, man, it must cost a lot less to do the digital instead of really setting that building on fire. But I don't know. I don't know how long people will, like 20 years from now, how are they going to look back at this time? Are they look back and go, this is the time of cheesy effects? But
Yeah.
then you look back at like Flash Gordon, and when I was a kid, it's great. And then you get to be in your 20s and you look at it and go, this is terrible. Why did I ever watch this? And then in your 30s, you look at it and again, you go, that's not that bad. And then 40s, you're like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good for what they were doing. So I think it just changes
It's true.
your perspective, however far away you get from it. But
It's
do you
true.
see parallels between painting and filmmaking? Like when you're thinking about a shot, could you also be thinking about it, how you're setting up a painting, or what the light source is coming from for your painting? Do you think about that consciously, or is it just something that automatically happens, if it happens?
I'd like to say I understand, yes and no, because when I was learning photography as a filmmaker, there was so much more to it than I imagined. When I'm just with my camera or I'm with my painting, it's so much easier than when you're dealing with three dimensionality, which, even though movies are on a two-dimensional format, when we're watching them on our big screen or TV or handheld device, it was shot in real life. There was real people, there was real cameras, and it was a real environment that they were taking these images from. So there's a lot more to consider than when unless you've ever been in a photography studio and seen, the main light, the back light, the secondary light, and this is what they're doing. Is I did learn, because I think even now, with us being digital coaches, most of us have ring lights or some way to have some kind of diffused lighting that we can keep from having too many shadows. And I teach that with my drawing classes. Okay, we're going to do shading now, and you're the source of the light versus a directional light. And filmmakers love overcast days. Not that you can predict it always, because it's the big sun is now being diffused by the clouds, right? And you don't have to you can create the shadows you want. But if you're working outside, you've got a lot more things to consider with environment and controlling lighting. And a lot of directors don't like to have to deal with real life issues like that. I've participated in a lot of those, like 48-hour film competitions. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. They used to
Mhm.
be 24 hours. I like the 48 hours. I'm older. I need a little more time. But you get a group of people, and we, pool together what are our resources. And when I've taught high school filmmaking, that's what I do. Okay, look around the room. This is who we are. We're not going to, make a movie not based in South Carolina, because this is where we live, the low country of South Carolina. We're not going to make a movie that takes place in the snow, okay? Because once every 10 years we'll have snow. So, being realistic, first of all, what are our resources? And what's exciting is you can make them from your own perspective and life and what's available to you. And that's true for any art. Maybe, yeah, I'd rather paint this in oils, but acrylics is what I can afford right now. Well, do the best you can at the acrylics, and you'll find sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between some acrylics and oils anymore. What
Mm.
used to be bigger gaps has closed because closer because of the quality of the materials that we have access to, and that's exciting to me. Like I say, embrace the new and the technology. See what you can do with it. It's there's always a place for being creative, no matter what your field is, no matter what you're doing. You have part of your brain devoted to creativity, and you have access to making new neural pathways between left and right. You mind if I tell a story about one of my students?
I don't. Go ahead.
So, this young man was a homeschool student who had ADHD and dyslexia and was depressed. His mom had studied, had great resources to help him, but he was so discouraged and felt so defeated that he wasn't even applying himself. He really felt like, I'm a complete failure. So his mom brought him to my studio, and I started teaching him drawing and painting. And this is one of those examples of someone who had a specific area of art they loved. He loved sculpture. And I saw, understanding his difficulties, how the sculpture just engaged him. Now, he would do drawing and he would paint, and he was really good at it, but sculpture just lit his fire. He I started entering the work in youth art competitions in our state. He started winning ribbons and first place awards, and it changed him. I saw how being creative and successful at it gave him hope, and it really got him out of depression. I didn't realize that we were releasing serotonin, the happiness chemical, as we do these things. But also, he was able to see that he wasn't a failure because he had these issues to overcome. He was able to knuckle down and do the work that his mama had been really working hard to put together, and even graduated from high school. Much to his surprise, probably more than anybody else's. And I started investigating what's going on here. What's going on with this art thing? How is it making such a difference? Especially when I had this young man who, in that circumstance, ended up having a brain infection and a stroke that paralyzed him on the right side of his body. So they saved his life, took his skull off, gave him a plastic skull, rehabilitated him for 4 months. And when he left the hospital, he had right hand curled up and dragging his right leg with a walker, and he couldn't talk. His mom brought him back to my studio. So, well, you got a left hand, see what we can do. And in a very short amount of time, he could draw and write and paint as well as he could with his right hand. Now, I'm sure it was challenging and it was a little slower, but he got there. Next thing you know, he's starting to talk. Well, then I get a call from his neurosurgeon. He's like, "What are you doing with David?" I'm just teaching him art. He said, "Well, don't stop, because he's not only is he stronger with his weak hand than I am, and I'm a surgeon, but he's also getting healing on the right side of his body." I didn't understand anything about neuroplasticity with the brain, how when one part's damaged, another part can fill in. Because he had already been building right brain, left brain, neural connections, they now stood him in good stead so that he could now adapt to the left hand what he could do before with his right hand. He started talking. You look at him now, he can walk, he can talk. He's a little slower, but he's got his sense of humor. He's not depressed. He's living a life that I know, and his family agrees, and even his neurosurgeon says art helped heal that young man.
Nice.
That's exciting to me. It's not just fun, it's not just something to trivialize. It has an important place in who we are as humans. And I just love to see more humans engage in their creative selves.
Yeah, I do often visualize in the mind how the brain connects, like those synapses and neural pathways. And I know it's not like always, I know there's not always in your mind, but that's how I visualize it. And if there's something you haven't done for a while, then it's a hallway that stretches off out of view and maybe there's some cobwebs and you haven't been down that hallway lately. And maybe over here, there's a hallway with a door for something you never tried or never did. And then you can just walk around through this maze of hallways that lead to different things. So that's interesting when I'm thinking about what I want to do. Like if I'm thinking about a project and I'm trying to figure out how it's going to express itself. Like, is it going to be a woodworking thing? Is it a writing thing? Is it something different? So, yeah, I think that just like when they talk about a way to keep your mind fresh is to do things that you normally do, but keep your eyes closed or be in the complete dark. Like if you're dressing, dress with your eyes closed because you're always dressing with your eyes open. So keep them closed and see. And it is different. And I'm not sure if it keeps the mind going, but it does make sense that it's making information travel down places that it doesn't normally. And that maybe that's why the 2-year-old is the creative genius versus the adult, because all those pathways and hallways you're going down all the time because you don't have to worry about all these other things. You know, you're not worried about when do I have to file my taxes and all these. You've got this wide open area of creativity.
That's good. That's good. I love it. And, being creative, which you are, I mean, just being a podcaster makes you creative because you have to make all those connections between all the left brain skills required with timeliness and technology and order and scheduling. But you're also creating content that's never been there before, which is practically the definition of creativity, is coming up with new things or new ways to do it. And so every day you're doing very creative acts just in your podcasting. So it's keeping your brain very sharp. So as I started seeing these things happening, and I had an adult student who loved sculpture, and she came to me and told me she had a late stage diagnosis of brain of cancer that she was given 6 months to live. And after we finished crying, I said, "Look, I got a big project. I got a whole room installation of porcelain room installation I'm doing. It's in 9 months. I need your help because you're good and I can't get all this done. I know I won't be able to do it unless you help me." She's like, "Karen, I don't even know if I'm going to be here in 9 months." I said, "Oh, yes, you are. But no matter what, you'll have a legacy. So please help me." So between all the medical stuff she was doing with with the cancer and chemotherapy and surgery, she was in the studio with me. We were laughing, coming up with new ways to create chocolates. It was called Taste and See Sweet Shop. So it was a whole room of porcelain chocolates, cakes, cupcakes, candies, cookies, trays, everything needed for a chocolate shop, but it was all made out of porcelain. And sure enough, she was there in 9 months with me for this 17-day big show. And very shortly after that was diagnosed as being in remission and eventually declared cancer free. Now, you know, she and her family convinced focusing on beauty, on creation, creativity, having fun, absolutely counterbalanced that fatal diagnosis to enable her to have a continued healthy, beautiful life that she wouldn't have had, I believe, if she had just accepted the diagnosis and curled up in a ball and went with the flow. I don't have a wide range of experience with these things, but I have enough to tell me that there is something to this consciously choosing to be creative. And so, I've got materials I've written and podcasts that a free podcast where I go into depth about different ways to be creative. So here's one. Here's one they did a research on people that sing in the shower. Okay.
Best place to sing.
I sing in the car when I'm by myself, but singing in the shower. Okay.
Well, imagine if you were in a car that had a shower. Multiple
I like
times better.
convertibles, so you can have both of those in my state.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
No, so they see people, you're rubbing, you're not trying to solve any problems. You're just scrubbing dubbing and you're singing along your favorite song and you get out and you don't even realize you've released serotonin, the happiness chemical, dopamine, all these really feel good things. You're nice and warm and toasty. And an idea pops in your brain. You don't realize you've been building left brain, right brain connections those whole 20 minutes, however long you've been in the shower. And you have a problem that had been percolating with a solution laid before you without having to figure it out. Or maybe it's something relational, but there's a new idea, a new thought that comes. And I can't tell you how many people have shared with me that they've had that experience just because they were singing in the shower.
Yeah, walking through those twisty hallways, and you just come upon the solution is just sitting there waiting. Yeah.
Behind the piles of laundry, that's what I think of. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a
Uh,
sense of purpose as a person makes all the difference. I think you can. It reminds me of like the Miracle Max scene in The Princess Bride, where what have you got that's worth living for? And
mhm.
if you don't have anything, then that's just it. So yeah, purpose helps. How do you measure, or when you have students that maybe don't feel like they're successful in their art, how do you measure success in different types of art?
I had a funny experience with that. When you go get your degrees in art, they make you turn you into a snob, really. You
Mm,
just, even if you had not a whole lot of success as a painter at first, eventually, you get enough skill, you maybe get a little snobby about it, right? So this young couple I'd met, because they'd met me, they had been to a fair and they bought their very first original piece of artwork, hung it over their couch. And I won't say it's on the level of Velvet Elvis, but it wasn't too much above
okay.
that level of Velvet, Elvis.
I mean, that's pretty good. Like artist abduction, from
So I'm standing there
Seinfeld.
smiling at this orange Vietnamese village or something, I don't know, it was huge,
That's a
and
good
it was a
color.
lot of orange. And I thought, I have right now in my hands this very vulnerable couple who will live or die in the arts based on what I say next. And yet I wasn't going to lie to them. And I just said, wow, look at all that orange. Look, I didn't know orange came in that many values. They're like, yeah, we like it too. It's like it didn't take me saying a lot of good things for them to feel validated. I didn't have to do a critique of the piece. I could just in some way validate their choice to choose a real live artwork, because our tastes are so subjective, right? So that orange painting made them happy. And who was I to stand there and say, ugh, it's horrible. I hate it. And yet there's a lot of times experts do that to us, whether it's dance or singing
Mm,
or I have a friend who loves to sing, and I don't think any 2 notes are on the same key. Now, I'm not perfect at it, so we've listened to enough good music, all of us in our lives. We can tell even in ourselves when we're off key, right? Oh, that's why
mm,
we sing in the shower, and that's why we sing in the car when no one can
mm,
hear us.
mhm.
But for her, she doesn't care, and I thought, who am I to steal her joy just because it's painful to listen to it? You know? It's because of my experience, maybe, as I'm teaching, and I've always said this, and when I had my own studio and kids came to my studio or my classroom or even in college, said, "This is a safe space. This is a no criticism zone," because guess which side of the brain criticism comes from? Left brain, okay? It's very analytical, right? And it's got a scale system, and it's pretty black and white. Whereas arts and music and this arena is so subjective. We have to let our right brain feel safe. It's sensitive. It's where the imagination comes to express itself. It's where inventiveness comes from, intuition comes from, expressing maybe those deep parts of our soul that are connected with the divine or the eternal. And they are vulnerable to criticism. And so I'm here as in charge saying this is a no criticism zone. I know my professors weren't trying to crush my soul when they I don't know why they used four-letter words, but they were pretty adamant about how bad a painter I
Oh,
was. I think they were trying to save the
goodness.
world from another bad painter. But, it
I
it
mean,
affected
I've seen Dada before, so I think there's
Okay. But think about the kind of confidence, you know,
gotta
Marcel Duchamp had to have to put a urinal in an art museum. I mean, there's
yeah.
something inside that enables someone to say boldly. And I know when I've tried to go to art fairs and sell my work, as a potter, have my pottery out there, my sculptures out there, I feel like I'm laying on that table naked to be poked and prodded and criticized, it's very hard for me. That's scary. And I applaud those who have no problem doing it. I'd rather someone else sold my work, than
Mm,
me. Or and so that was something that I found. I'm not that confident. I can lay it
I
out there, but I don't want to be the one standing behind it saying, "Yeah, it's worth $1.298." Don't you think it? What you want to pay 99 cents for it? Come
mm.
on, my heart and soul went into it.
That's
I
that's
don't.
you gotta
I
get
don't
into the sales of it and say, "Look, this let me
know.
explain to you how this piece was created." And you gotta
Tell the
storytelling.
story.
It's storytelling. And
Yeah,
then it's a lot different. Like that maybe the gold urinal will make sense after that. But it, I don't think criticism is necessarily a bad word. I think I would like to hear constructive criticism, but maybe you don't even need the adjective. Just criticism's okay because how are you going to be sure in what you're doing? Certainly, people can crush you by saying this is terrible, but if you have that creativity in you that's trying to get out somehow, and maybe what you visualize is not what you create, there's a separation. But this your son that's drawn in crayon with the rays coming out is not photorealistic. That's okay. So I don't know. I like enough criticism, and I think your success in art is when you can get to the point and you say, "Oh, okay." Nevertheless, like even if everyone said it was bad and you still liked it, someone else is going to like it too. You just got to find that audience, or you just deal with it yourself. I mean, it's
As a teacher, and this is really important what you're bringing up, because there's certainly, as you're a student, you want to get better, right? So there's a place of correction. So I treat this very gently. And some people you can talk to more directly than others, and that's part of discerning. This person can't handle anything more than that's very
mm,
good. That's a good start. That's a good direction to be going in. Some people can handle, look, all right, well, let's try it next time. Let's look at the proportions with the composition and see if we can do this more successfully. It'll even be better if you do it this way. So there's ways to say this, because most of the time the wounds happen when someone just, I mean, somebody told me in kindergarten their teacher ripped their paper because they colored outside the lines. So in second grade, someone says, let's go color. She goes, I can't color. I mean, she's already convinced at 7 years old that she can't color because a kindergarten teacher ripped her paper in front
mm,
of the class and said she was bad. And so there's criticism, and there's critiques, and then there's constructively correcting and bringing someone to a higher. And I realize, even with perfectionism, we all want our work to be perfect, right? It's a matter of seeking after excellence instead of perfection. I think that where we're going to find, as you talk about purpose and satisfaction and joy in what we're doing, if we have, an expectation for this to look like a Leonardo da Vinci painting, who only did, half a dozen in his lifetime, practically, that we have no idea what he went through to get those layers of skin tones, and just
mm,
plopping on a couple of daubs of paint, wasn't it? Okay. Uh, so there's ways to help a person get better from where they are to where they want to go. And do they have ears to hear? Do they want to hear? Or they just want
mm,
to have fun and feel. I don't have to dictate to them, that they should continue to practice drawing till they, get this technique better. It's one of the problems I have with abstract expressionism, because that's where my professors, that was their training, right? That's why they didn't really like my portraiture. They said, you can just go sit on street corners and, sell portraits. You don't have to go to school to be a portrait painter, right? And I didn't understand what they were saying, but I knew I whipped out abstract expressionist paintings to buy my materials for graduate school, because I was still taking painting. So I could do them, but I didn't feel like for the most part they have the form and the structure and the understanding of color and the what makes a good composition to just be thrust out into it. And that's basically what they were trying to do with us, just make us thinkers, which is good. Um, but then not having the foundational skills needed to pull it off, you know.
Yeah.
I feel responsible to anyone sitting, before me. I'm going to give them the best techniques I have. You described turning the lights off to activate right brain, left brain. I don't let them look at their paper when they start drawing. They use cheap paper. They're not allowed to use a pencil. We're using either crayon, Conny crayon, or a marker,
Charcoal.
and we're
Yeah.
not looking at the paper. We're looking at what we're drawing. We're activating that left brain, right brain. We're building neural connections. We're also putting images in our brain. You talk about having it full blown, whatever you want to do, full blown in your how did you get those images there to begin with? That's part of what we're doing when we take into our eye gate what we want to see, and at first that's all we're doing, just these objects we're looking at, from our hand to a person to a plant, apple, whatever they are, whatever the objects are, we're looking at them in nature, in 3D before us. And then we're going to, create lines. We start with lines, contour line drawings. That's all they do for a long time. Now, I do let them to start adding lines and looking at the paper a little bit, but at first the discipline is to engage that right brain by not looking at the paper, disengaging from the product. Let your muscle memory and your brain develop eye-hand coordination first before it's about the product. When you have a child or a little one, you're just throwing and catching, right? When they sit up, they have a ball rolled to them. It's one of the first toys all around the world. It's the most popular toy in the world, a ball, right? Eye-hand coordination is the number one skill for drawing, right? Your eye and your hand are going to work together. But if you're just taught to do whatever, I mean, that's fun, and it has a place. I'm not saying it doesn't. But for somebody that really wants to do naturalistic work, you're going to have to build those drawing skills to get it up to what you want. What is your purpose and desire for it?
It's good. That's good. The art of criticism maybe is a thing. And I can see why, if you're taking a class on drawing different light sources, then maybe you don't do whatever you want to do. Maybe you practice that skill that the class is trying to teach you. And then when you work on something yourself, you can use what you learn there, or you can not use it, or you can do the opposite and say, well, this is a light source, but it's from, 3 different places. Like, it's, whatever. You're doing something different if you want to do something different. But if you can do the other thing, then maybe that's chasing that perfection. I do like the idea of, you make the perfect thing and then you put a little imperfection in it. I sometimes, when people explain that, it aggravates me, but other times I go, yeah, okay, I got it. I got it. That makes sense to me. Like, if I'm writing something and it can be too perfect. So you're like, no, I'm going to change this letter or change the spelling of this word to, it's the word that sounds the same, but it's spelled differently. And that's going to aggravate some people. I don't know if I do it to aggravate people, or if I like the difference between the way something sounds, knowing that you have the layer of what it sounds like, what it looks like, and what it means. But I get that a little more now than I used to. It used to aggravate me, but now maybe that's getting older, is you go through these layers of learning and then being aggravated by things, and then doing things to aggravate people becomes fun. So, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case, but
Well,
nevertheless,
here, there's rules of art, there's rules of design. These are things that, even if writing, okay, we learned the rules of writing, right? And then we're free to break the rules. And I think it's important to know them first. And it's not universally true that you have your people that just jump in as writers, jump in as painters or musicians, and they're just immensely talented and can do what they do and express and break all the rules. So it's not rules for rules sake to me. It's more a matter of I want to put as many tools in my students' hands to help them be successful at whatever choices they want to make in the future. And it's fun to see that involvement. And like you said, when you're really young, you have a different set of priorities as you get older. Your perspective changes, your priorities change, and what you want to have happen and what it is perceived as change. And we're leaving a legacy. When you write a book, when you create a painting or a drawing or a piece of music or a poem, it's going to last longer than you are usually, and it's you're leaving part of yourself there with it, and it's either going to be a good legacy or a bad legacy. Or I know my father was a Marine, and he started out as on vaudeville as an Irish storyteller and comedian, and you ended up in the Marine Corps, which seems such a dichotomy. He was a teacher in the Marine Corps and actually wrote some textbooks, but when he got out, he actually let me teach him to paint. And so the last part of his life, he painted. Well, he at first he copied Van Gogh's, he copied artists, which is a legitimate learning technique, by the way. And he developed some photography, some ideas, and some paintings, and we give them to my sister and myself for Christmas. And I tell you what, the Met couldn't ask to buy that painting from me, those paintings from me. And obviously, it's not because they're better than the paintings that are in the Met, although they are better than some of them, quite frankly. But it's the sentimental value. It's the legacy that he gave to us through his creative efforts. And we all have that opportunity. My grandmother, 96 years old, knitting us these booties, multicolored booties that when we were kids, forget about it. We didn't appreciate them. But I'm telling you, as we got older, we're like, these booties are like gold. She made them. She picked the colors. We knit up the holes that we wear them out. And these matter, and we all can do it. We can all leave these kind of treasures to our families.
I often think of sentimental value just being it's the story. Like if you wanted to reduce what sentimental value is, it's the story of it. It's not the actual thing. It's the story. You said before your eye gate, which is nice. I'm going to use that because I like thinking about things as gateways, kind of like the hallways. But Tracy Morgan, actor, a comedian, says when he's talking about thinking, his mind grapes because he visualizes his brain like grapes. So I would say try working that into a sentence with the eye gate and mind grapes. I think it's going to work well for you. That's really could be a painting when you're painting a portrait of a person and then there's grapes in their head. So it would probably have to be called grapes of wrath and different expressions on the person's face. I would think mixing a lot of things.
Love it.
It's going to work out. What's the best way for people to see what you're doing and be able to follow your work?
KarenDeLoachArt.com. www.KarenDeLoachArt.com. Pretty easy. Yeah, I like easy. Some of my work. There's also I have a art subscription group people of any skill level can participate in for small fee. Can join us for 3 live classes a month, and it's really fun to create a community. It's called Creative Connections, and we encourage one another. And I do teachings. I do some art history show from that's appropriate to whatever we're studying, and expose and tell stories, because I think it does make it more memorable when there's a story behind it. So
I have in the show notes, I have the link for your website and then also for your Facebook and LinkedIn if people are interested in those things. It's good stuff. Lots to think about. Creativity. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts you have in closing?
I guess, you know, as we talk about trying new things and opening up doors on down that hallway, and, you know, we all battle fear in some way, shape, or form, or anxiety, and I just wanna say, you know, give yourself grace to try something new. You know, I'm 70, I'm not a kid anymore, I still plan to be around for the next 30, 40 years, but creating all the way, it's not something you ever have to retire from, or should you? It's something you can retire to, like my own father did. And so I say, be gracious to yourself. You remember when you were 5 and 6 and a creative genius. What'd you love doing then? You can do it again. All right, maybe you're not going to be uh, you know, New York City ballet prima donna, but you could still dance. I just took a line dancing class, you know, so have fun. It's the fun part of life and being human, and get you up off your couch or whatever, and doing something to excite your brain, get rid of brain fog, get rid of brain fatigue, emotional issues can all be expressed. They even now do neural doodles. I saw them in some galleries recently. They've gotten so popular. People are just doing these doodles where they don't think about anything, and then they color and paint and draw them and modify them, and they end up looking like look like neural connections in the brain. Isn't
Wow.
that funny? They don't look, sometimes they can look like grapes, I think, maybe on the
Mm,
vine.
yes.
So that's what I wanna leave, is be gracious to yourself.
Very nice. Thank you very much for your time. And like I said, the links are in the show notes for people interested. And I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.